Yeah. How many people know what movie that's from? On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. That's right. The Wedding Singer. A classic. Oh, now it's a classic, if you can believe that thing came out in 1998. That movie is now 25 years old. It's graduated college and already moved back with its parents. Speaking of parents, as Sarah said, happy Mother's Day, including my wife, Dana, who's here, and my mom, who's probably watching online right now. Happy Mother's Day, Ma. And yes, I ate. All right, so, well, we've been exploring songs like these to be able to illustrate in this series the different points of our lives, how culture typically looks at a certain topic, if you will. And if you're just joining us, we're in week 5 of a series we're calling Dating Apps. And this is a principle conversation, all right? This is important to remind you that this is a principle conversation, not exactly an example conversation. Now, what does that mean? This means that we're looking at the principles that God calls us to in Scripture in how to follow Him well, how to love those around us well, and then we put those principles into practice in our relationships. But no matter where you are in terms of a relationship, dating or otherwise, I think we can identify with many of the principles of what this song brings up. I mean, we like the idea of growing old with someone. We love the idea of getting old with someone. You know, I talk to married couples or those that are getting married all the time, and, you know, I ask them, why do you want to get married? And one of the answers that they come up with is, I want to grow old with someone. I want to share my life with someone. And as we've discovered over the past few weeks, all of us want to experience love. We want to be loved. We want to know love. And for those of us that have stepped into this relationship with Jesus, for those of us who are part of that family, one of the things that God calls us to is this, and it's found in John 13 verses 34 and 35. And it says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So as followers of Jesus, it's even more important because what's going to set us apart? You know, how will people know that we're followers of Christ? Well, Jesus says it's by your love. And he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And this has to be our defining characteristic, not just in our dating relationships, but really in our relationships as well. So over the past few weeks, we've been looking about, okay, how does this look inside of our dating relationships? And we talked about, in week 1, we talked about what does it mean to be satisfied single, right? And then we looked at the principles in week 2 of who do I date? And then we talked about, okay, week 3, how do I date? And then last week, Pastor Chris walked us through the ever important conversation, how do I break up? Okay? So we've learned truth after truth and principle after principle of how to apply these truths that God gives us. Specifically, this time we're applying these truths in the dating relationship. Now, there's another group of individuals that I want to speak to today. These are the individuals that at the beginning of this series heard that we were doing a series on dating and thought, oh good, I can check out for the next 6 weeks. Hopefully that's not true. Hopefully you found yourself being able to learn something and apply something over the past 6 weeks. But today, I want to talk to some of those of you who are here, maybe watching online, who find themselves in this category of dating. Married. That's right, my friends, today is for you. And this isn't just about anyone who's married today. Honestly, it's for everyone. It's for everyone who plans to be married, who wants to be married. And this is also, and I'll get to the reason why this is true, this is also a principles conversation for those of you who have no desire to ever get married. Okay? So this is a principle conversation, and one of the things we're going to talk about is how to date well in marriage. Now, wait a minute, Anthony. Am I supposed to date when I'm married? You're not supposed to date other people. But yes, you are supposed to be dating your spouse. Because here's the truth. Your marriage didn't start on your wedding date. It didn't. Your marriage started on your first date. During that first date with your future spouse, you begin laying down the foundation for the day that you would say, I do. You begin laying the foundation that your marriage stands upon today, this is why we've been talking about over the past few weeks, has been so important, because if you're not married yet or you're planning on getting married, these principles will help us to build a marriage on solid ground. So for those of you who are married, let's dream a little. Excuse me. How long have you been married? How long ago was your very first date? Think back to that day. Replay it in your mind for a little bit. Have fun with it. You see, we don't realize that our concept of dating our spouse is actually something that we've already built into the foundation of our marriage. My wife's name is Dana. She's the talented one in the relationship. She's led you in worship many a time. She sings, plays piano, plays cello. I'm basically just riding on her coattails. Our first date was to see the remake of Alice in Wonderland that came out with Johnny Depp, which I'm sorry is a terrible movie, and sorry if you worked on it or if it is your favorite movie, but it's not good. And my wife and I, we agreed on our very first date that this wasn't a great movie, so we had a lot of fun commenting on the movie and making fun of the movie. So I think in a way Dana was getting a taste of what she was getting into, but we did have some great conversations before and after that. So when you think about your first date with your spouse, what was it like? Where were you? What did you do? What were you feeling? What were they wearing? Because no first date story is exactly alike. I mean, each of us has a different first date story, but I can bet you we all have a story. And my assumption is that all of our first date stories, or all of our dating stories, have one thing in common. We pursued. No matter what side of the relationship that you were on, we pursued. That means we did something to try to attract the other person. We did something to try to get that person to be interested in us. We did something so we could learn more and more and more about the other person. We pursued. But do you know why we pursue? We pursue because it's part of who we are. And that's because we were created in the image of a God who pursues. You see, just as we all have a desire to be loved and to experience love, we all have something inside of us that when we see something we want, when we see something we desire, we pursue it. And so the reason we have this innately in us is that's who God is. He pursues us. So naturally, it would make sense that we would reflect that characteristic of God when it comes to love. From the very beginning, God has pursued us. I mean, you look at the story of Adam and Eve. After they had sinned, they didn't turn to God. In fact, they ran away from God. But we're told one of the first things that God did was that he pursued them, right? Because God has always had a heart of reconciliation. Jesus uses parables. That means stories to illustrate a point about God. And one of the stories two of the stories that he uses, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, are all about God's character and how he pursues us and how he wants to have a relationship with us. I mean, Jesus, when asked why he even came to earth, Luke 19:10, he says, "For the Son of Man is married, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." This was Jesus's overarching mission. This is why he came, right? So to seek something is to pursue something. And we pursue so many different things. We pursue love, we pursue money, we pursue fame, we pursue relationships because they're important to us. Well, God does the same thing. God pursues us because we are important to him, being created in his image. So in dating, you pursue. And if you're married, the desire to pursue and the desire to be pursued, guess what? It doesn't stop. It's just something, unfortunately, that I think gets muddied in what we are pursuing. Which leads me to principle one of our conversation today. Principle number one is love pursues. See, if God taught us over and over and over again about his relentless pursuit of us, then we have to understand that that pursuit is at the core of our relationships. See, Scripture often uses marriage as an illustration of our relationship with God. You see, and God designed marriage as an example of the relationship with Jesus. Okay, he used this example of our relationship, the church's relationship with Jesus, and said the marriage is like that. In fact, husbands, he even says that our relationship, that we are to love our wives the way that Christ loves the church. And so he calls for the spouses to be very intentional in their pursuit of God. So if God pursues us, then it's critical in our lasting relationships to pursue well. Now, this is very, very important. If I'm going to pursue my wife well, God is the one that pursues us. The only way I'm going to pursue my wife well, or any relationship that I am in, is if I am pursuing the one who has created it all. I need to be pursuing God as well, because he's taught us that pursuit is a part of him. It's a part of who he is. So it's critical that you are pursuing the other person as well. And if you are married, you did this at one point in your life. You worked to pursue the other person. And my question to you is, did it stop? Has it stopped? Do you find yourself simply existing with your spouse? Have you succumbed to the overwhelming nature of your schedule, the demanding nature of your job or your children, and then by the time you get home, neither of you want to pursue anything except for dinner and bed? And if it did stop, why did it stop? You see, God calls us to this characteristic of him, this idea of pursuit, because he wants us to be able to see not only just a key to our relationship with him, but our relationship with others as well. Because when I pursue something, it communicates incredible value. And so you need to go back to doing the things that you did to pursue your spouse if you want to have any hope of keeping the marriage flame burning in the long run, or to reignite it if you feel like it's burning out. And so how do you do that? Well, if the principle is love pursues, and we understand that pursuit communicates value, then one of the things that we need to do is we need to practice our pursuit. And one of the best ways to do that inside of a marriage is date nights. Yeah. Clearly you need to hear me speak on this, because none of you are excited about date nights, and that is sad. That's sad. We should love date nights, because you have to establish your date nights as a married couple. But you also have to establish your date nights as a couple. You got so excited when you were dating the other person, right? You were so excited. What are you doing Friday night? Nothing. What are you doing? Going out again? Yeah, you were so excited. You couldn't help but do this. Do you guys do that now? Like, think about it. When you're with your, maybe your dad friends, right? And you're like, what are you doing next Friday? We're going on a date night. Nobody does that. And that's sad. You have to establish your date night as a married couple. And just because you're married doesn't mean you're no longer dating. And if you don't believe that, then you really need to practice this. The establishment of the date night is the practice of the pursuit. Okay, when you get into the practice of regularly dating your spouse, you're actually obeying God's desire, which is found in Genesis 2:24, and it says it this way: "This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." This is the very beginning of creation. Right at the very beginning, he says, "This is what I want you to do." And this word united, all right, this word united is the Hebrew word, all right, because the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. It's this fun little word here, right, because you all can read that. It's the Hebrew word davek. Everybody say davek. Look at that, you're all speaking Hebrew, all right, which literally means to catch by pursuit, all right? From the very beginning, this was what you were supposed to do. You need to be in pursuit. So God is saying, yes, you got to keep pursuing one another. And so, yes, dating your spouse is found in the scriptures. And let's be honest, I've met many couples, unfortunately, who are just existing in a state of coexistence, where you find yourself in the daily grind of managing your personal calendars, your household operations, childcare, and before long, you see your spouse as nothing more than a roommate or a business partner, instead of that special someone that you, at one point or another, I'm sure said was the love of your life. And again, you have to remember, you have to go back to those things you did as a couple when not only were you working hard to win one another's affection, but you were working hard to get to know one another, where you were communicating incredible value to the other person because you were pursuing them. I remember when Dana and I were dating, I wanted to impress her with my amazing ability to listen to her. So I remember she told me that she played cello. And I remember thinking to myself, wouldn't it be cool if I found like some quartet or symphony or something that had a cellist as part of it to take her to, right? So I thought I was being clever, okay? So we're near New York City, right? Something has to be happening, right? Some chamber music or something where there was a cellist, right? Well, in my findings, I found the motherlode, a quartet of cellists. Jackpot, right? So I bought the tickets, and I met her at the Port Authority because we were in a long-distance relationship. She lived in Jersey City. I lived on the Upper East Side. And you know what I'm talking about. And I didn't tell her where we were going, all right, because I wanted her to be surprised, and surprised she was. It turns out that this quartet of cellists, they also had an acoustic drummer, and they did covers of heavy metal songs in the basement of Baruch College. Dana reminded me this week that it was called Break of Reality. I should have been my first clue that we were not going to be venturing into Mozart. But at this point, there was no turning back. So, thank you. Thank you. Yep, happy Mother's Day. You get a dad joke. So, I should have known why tickets were so cheap, but you know what? Needless to say, we had a good laugh. But you know, the moment that they started standing up and sticking their tongues out to each other, I was like, it's time to go. So I was working hard, but not always smart, to win Dana's affections. But I think about those early dates quite often. And I think about them not because we are the same people that we were when we were dating, because we're not. But I think about what it was like. And we are called to rekindle those times of talking and of flirting and those things that bring us back to what we were doing to pursue that other person. And Jesus understood this. This is why Jesus communicates this in our relationship with him too. In fact, when he's addressing the church in Ephesus, right, in the book of Revelation of all places, it says this in Revelation 2:3-5. He says, he's talking to the church at Ephesus. He says, you have persevered and you've endured hardships for my name and have not grown weary, yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first. And then he says, consider how far you've fallen. Repent and do the things you did at first. Jesus states that, listen, you've forsaken your first love. In this case, he's saying, listen, you've forsaken your first love, which is me, which is him. And because of this, they were no longer acting like they loved him or that they were followers of him. It goes back to that passage we looked at when we started today, that love wasn't their defining characteristic. And so the solution, he said, was simple. You got to stop doing the things that you're doing now and go back to the things that you did when your love was new. You know, and Jesus is calling this to all of us. Because as I said, I'm not going to be able to pursue or love my wife well if I'm not pursuing and trying to learn more about God. It's just not possible. And so God consistently tells us, okay, go back to, because it's not God who moves in our relationship. He's consistently pursuing us. We're the ones who tend to go in the other direction. And so he says, you want to get that back? I haven't moved. You got to return to what you knew before. And he's saying that's the same thing you do in these relationships. And listen, there's a vast difference between hanging out and heading out for a special time together. I think what makes a date night different from just hanging out is your state of mind. That there is an intentionality with pursuit. You are planning to be with and to focus on your spouse. This isn't, what do you want to do tonight? I don't know, what do you want to do tonight? No. This is intentional pursuit. And as we've learned, dating should be getting to know one another better. It should be. And that shouldn't stop when you get married. In fact, that should impact the kind of dates you go on, because dating is not just how do we entertain ourselves. Dating is how do we get to know one another better. Which leads me to principle number 2 for today, which is this: love seeks to know. So if principle number 1 is love pursues, understanding that that's at the core of who we are and what we're supposed to do, and not only in our relationship with others, but our relationship with God, the next step is love seeks to know. There's a moment in Jesus' life where one of the religious leaders is trying to test Jesus, right? And he's in the exchange, the religious leader actually gets the answer right when Jesus asks him to sum up the law of Moses. And so Jesus says, you know, what's the law of Moses? And the religious leader says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, that's correct. So if that's correct, in order to love God well, all right, remember, we're talking about these principles, right? In order to love God well with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our strength, with all of our mind, right? You need to understand that there's an aspect not only of pursuit, but of learning all you can about it. I mean, think about it. In our own lives, when we're obsessed with something, when we're excited about something, it usually does get all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our strength, and all of our mind. And so he's saying, in order to love our spouse well, not only do we need to be pursuing our relationship with Jesus, but we can also learn from Jesus on how to love others. So to love God with all of our mind, for instance, is to seek to know God more. Because when we love something and we truly, deeply love something, we want to know all there is to know about it. New relationships often start with long conversations, right? Oh, we talked for hours. Nowadays, I don't know, does it start, can you do long conversations on Snapchat? Is that a thing? Probably, no, none of you know this, do you? Yeah, so come to talk to me afterwards. Anyway, why did you do that? Because each person wants to know more and more and more about the person that they are pursuing. And it flows naturally. Nobody forced you to do it. But it flowed naturally because, again, you were pursuing something of value, and now you wanted to know more about that person. Because love seeks to know and seeks to understand and seeks to better know the person and to understand them. And this shouldn't stop just because you're married. And if you think you know all about your spouse, you're wrong. One of my favorite things to do is to make Dana laugh. I love to make my wife laugh. And trust me, the jokes that I told when we were dating are, for lack of a better term, dated. So I'm constantly trying to find out new ways to make her laugh. And that only comes when you seek to know the other person better. But for some reason, after marriage, our conversations just start to decline. And we become involved in things that take up time. And when you do have the opportunity to sit down and talk, we find that we have less and less things to say. And when we come home from work or finish putting the kids down, we just want to scroll through our phone, watch TV, or go to sleep. But here's the truth, my friends. Conversation is not only where you get to know the person, but you also get to experience the rest of the person's life. Because even though you're married, the truth is most of you live your life apart. Think about it. You spend more time apart than you do together. Going to work, going to school, taking the kids to appointments. I mean, you do this. And yes, I know we just got out of a global pandemic that locked us into a house together for a while, but we were both individuals while we were working or had school or had the children. You still weren't making time for intimate conversations. So if you're going to seek to know the other person better and to love them well, you're going to have to be intentional about that time that you are spending with them. Now listen, I know I'm about to be general, and but it's true. Generally, we found this to be true. Women are better at this than men. Okay? Men, we got to put a little bit more effort into this. So men, we need to make sure that we work to bring this into their life. Okay? And all of you, well, both, all you need to do is pay attention to what happens in your life outside of your time together so that you can share that, okay? And don't just share the facts, okay? Well, I went to work, I went to the bathroom, I had lunch, that's it. Don't just do that, all right? We want to know how that incident at work impacted you. How did that make you feel? And here's why you do that. Because you're allowing the person to see your heart. And yes, I know it takes vulnerability, and we hate vulnerability, but this is a way that you get to love the other person. Because you are bringing this person into a part of you, into a part of your life that they're not in. And listen, man, I know you think that she married you because you're so strong and you have it all together, but guess what? You don't. And she knows that too. And this is true for both men and women, but sometimes we hide the things that we're going through. And we think that the other person doesn't see it, but guess what? They see it. And that nervousness, that anxiousness, they see it and they know you're preoccupied. And then rather than them understanding why, they have to guess. And listen, you don't want your spouse guessing because they always guess the worst possible scenario. And even though the reason that you're feeling this way is because of what's happening with your boss or with your coworker, your spouse thinks it's because of them. And they think that it's something that they've done, or they think that it has something to do with the way that you view them or the way that you love them, or that in some way, shape, or form your relationship has changed. And when the truth is your relationship hasn't changed at all, there's just this thing over here that's happening that you're not being honest about. So you're not telling them and you're not sharing this with them. And as a result, it creates this big divide that never had to be there in the first place. So they need to know. It's important for your relationship. It's important for your relationship so they know your heart, they know what's going on, and they know what's going on with you. So you need to create that space. And my friends, this is also true with your relationship with God. You need to set aside that time to be able to share your heart with Him too. So many times we go to God in prayer and it's a laundry list of requests. And that's okay. At least you're spending time with Him. But what he wants you to do is share your heart with him. To tell him about your day and how it's affecting you. And as you do that, you experience something. You experience something with him, but as you do that with each other, you experience this incredible sense of intimacy. And that's what God is calling us into. My friend Justin, he plays bass, he's a service chaplain here. He told me that he would take notes, right? He would take notes throughout his day about things that happened. Nothing big, not like a diary or anything, but like 5 things that happened. So that when he came home, he had talking points, and he would use this opportunity to spark conversation. There's also this little thing called Table Talk. You can get it on Amazon for like $6. And it's just fun questions that you can ask for the day, or you can ask for the spouse. And you know, we do it at dinner time sometimes. You would like, you know, if you were a sandwich, what kind of sandwich would you be? I don't know. My wife's like, you'd probably be pastrami. And I'm like, you know what? That's right. But you actually are creating space to be able to do that. And it's actually not encouraged to just do it over dinner, because you should actually be doing something for your date night. So years ago, we did some research at Hoboken Grace as far as people of how they got connected and how they stayed connected. We found something quite interesting. We found that something like 80% of women would stay for a year if they got connected in a dinner group within the first 6 weeks. But the same scenario for men, if they got connected to a dinner group within the first 6 weeks, only 67% of men stayed for the year, so it's a little bit lower. Here's something else that's crazy. 78% of women stayed for a year if they got connected to a team, which means they began serving on a team, right? You know how many men stayed if they got connected to a team within the first 6 weeks? 96%. You know what that means? That means that guys don't necessarily connect just sitting around a table. They connect doing things together. That's how we connect. We get together with our friends. We go do something. There's something about it. It opens us up. It frees us up to be able to communicate and to connect better. Take advantage of that in your marriage. You need to find hobbies of things that you enjoy doing together. And you need to bring those into your date night. My wife and I love bowling. I know it's kind of weird, but we love bowling. So we set a date night. We actually have a bowling date night on the calendar coming up. We also love to play miniature golf. And we love to go to thrift stores because we're old. Anyway. But we found out things, and we only found out these things by sharing with one another of the things that we like to do, and then we start doing those things together. And yes, we then can connect over dinner or dessert as well. Why? Because love seeks to know, and I want to continue to get to know my spouse and give her the opportunity to get to know me as well. Because listen, my friends, your lives have changed. As I said, you are not the same people that you were when you said, I do. Our lives go through, we go through things like illnesses and tragedies, and then you add some real highs, things like you add children into the mix, or your career changes, or you end up moving. This all has an effect on you. Your spouse has changed. So you're going to still get to need to know them. And you need to continue to check in with one another and continue to seek to know one another. It's the same thing in our relationship with God. It says so in both the Jewish scriptures, which we call the Old Testament, and in the New Testament. In fact, James, the brother of Jesus, wrote in the New Testament, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And so again, if we're taking these principles of what God says is in love and reflects our relationship with him, we have to bring it into our relationship with others. And so the idea of drawing near, this idea of knowing God, develops intimacy with him and will also develop intimacy with your spouse. So, in case you haven't figured it out yet, you need date nights. You need to calendar it. And we learned this in the habit forming series, right? You need to make it a habit. And yes, parents, I'm talking to you too. And yes, new parents, I'm especially talking to you. You really need them. You can leave them with a babysitter for a couple hours, they'll be fine. So what's a good gauge for date nights? Again, you're not going to find this exact thing in Scripture, but in our experience, these are the best frequencies for date nights depending on what stage you find yourself in. Now listen, this is the bare minimum. If you want to do more, do more. So without kids, weekly, you have no excuse. You should be going on date nights every single week, multiple times if you can do it. All right? You get kids, you introduce kids, ages 0 to 6, monthly. Start there. Start there. All right? Ages 6 plus, bi-weekly, every other week. And then once those kids are grown and out of the house, you go back to weekly. Got it? This is the bare minimum. More if you can do it. And then calendar it. You don't struggle to go to work, do you? Well, some of you do. But anyway, it's important to you, right? This should be more important. Well, Anthony, we can't afford to go out every Friday night. Listen, I'm not telling you to go to Del Frisco's every night, okay? It can be a bike ride. It can be a walk. You can go to the city and explore a new area. One of my wife's and I's favorite date nights is just going to Target. She gets to go around and I get snacks. It's a great date night. I'm like, sure, babe, go look at the shoes. But it's so important. And you're like, oh, Anthony, we don't have any babysitters. Well, guess what? Get in the community. We've been telling you that since week 1. There are babysitters all over this place. In fact, I knew there's a couple couples that I know that actually just swap date nights. Like we'll say, okay, this week we're going to take your kids, you guys go out, and then next week you take our kids and we're going to go out. And they do that every month. That's great. Pastor Chris and his wife, they used to have just dinner groups meet at their house, and then they would go out on a date night. They would say, okay, yeah, sure, you can host your dinner group at our house. Here's the monitor. We'll see you in a couple hours. Here's the truth. Stop making excuses. This is so important. This is so important. This is more important than you going to your job. Because you go to your job. You don't even think about that. But he's telling you, these are the same principles that if you want to have a thriving relationship with anybody, really, these are the principles you need to put in place. And again, it goes back to your relationship with God. Because to be perfectly honest, you should be having date nights with God as well. Way more frequently than this. Because it's only through your date nights with God that you're going to be able to love your spouse, love your significant other, and love others in your relationships well. So you need to calendar those things too. And just like date nights with your spouse, they don't always have to be date nights. My wife would have great date lunches, right? I know another couple, they actually once a month go into work late to say, okay, today we're going to go into work late because we are going to drop the kids off at school and then we are going to have a nice breakfast date day. It's being intentional. It's calendaring it. You want your marriage to be better? Start dating your spouse. You want your relationship with God to be better? Start dating God. You want your relationship with someone to be better? Be intentional. Pursue and get to know them. And if you find yourself in a spot where maybe you need a little bit more help, we have a wonderful thing called Reengage. It's a 14-week small group curriculum. My wife and I have led other couples through it before. It's fantastic. It's going to be launching again in the fall. And then also we have our Hoboken Grace Counseling Center, which is some wonderful licensed professional counselors. You can go to counselinghoboken.com and learn more about that. They'd love to be able to walk you through what you might be finding yourselves in as well. And if you aren't married and you don't plan on being it, who do you date? You date God. Because these principles are His. You're only going to be able to love your spouse well if you are doing these principles. So as we conclude today, I want you to remember this. First and foremost, the difference maker in your marriage isn't you. It's Jesus. Jesus' presence is what changes everything, not your presence. But you do have an exciting duty, though. You get to date your spouse. You get to love your spouse and help your spouse become the person that God created them to be. So date your spouse. And remember, the point of marriage isn't you. The point of marriage isn't even your spouse. The point of marriage is to love your spouse in such a way that showcases Jesus and his power to a world of husbands and wives and men and boys and girls in desperate need of a God who can rescue, reconcile, restore, and redeem their broken lives. And as we look at these principles, keep pursuing, keep learning, keep communicating, something incredible happens. Our hearts grow fonder for our spouses. It's the same thing that happens in our relationship with God. If we keep pursuing him and we keep communicating with him, our heart grows fonder for him as well. And our relationship is more intimate. We see the character in our spouses and we celebrate them more and more and more, and we develop more empathy and understand what they're going through. We grow deeper in our love for one another. And as this happens, we begin to communicate to the world around us something different. That the love in our relationship can happen in every family, but unfortunately it doesn't. People get a glimpse. They get a glimpse of the love between us. Not the kind of love that the world expects, but a love that has the foundation of God. And that's a love that will then give them a glimpse of the love that God has for them. They will experience the truth of what Jesus says, that they will know that we are Jesus' disciples because of the way we love one another. Now I'm going to invite the band back up here. We're going to pray, and we're going to go through one more song where we get to actually practice this in our relationship with God. During this next song, pursue him, get to know him with all your heart. And then once we get out of that song, once we get out of there today, I want you to calendar your next date night. Make that a priority. And I can't wait to see what he's going to do in your relationships. Will you pray with me? Father, I want to thank you for this truth. I want to thank you for the way that you love us. I want to thank you for the way that you pursue us. Father, first and foremost, I pray that they understand that the core of these principles here today is how we can grow more and more deeper in our relationship with you. That we can pursue you because we know that you pursue us, and that we can get to know you more. That idea that James says of drawing near to you so that you draw near to us. Also, I pray for those who are married here today, that they may find hope and be encouraged by these principles. That they will experience a love that is far deeper than any of them could have ever imagined. For those that are here today that are engaged or planning on getting married or want to get married, that they start to put these principles into practice today. Don't wait until they're married. And then for those who are here today who aren't married, may they remember that there's an incredible God who is pursuing them right now and invites them into this intimate relationship with him. God, we love you. We thank you for this time together. And we pray this in the name of the most incredible pursuit of all, which is that of Jesus Christ. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.